Episodes of the Green Corn Rebellion Show are sponsored by Oklahoma Progress Now. Oklahoma Progress Now is a 501c4 organization focused on building progressive power in Oklahoma. Their primary efforts are on developing progressive content for a 21st century audience, coalition, and capacity building across progressive organizations and causes, and working to see elected leaders who are more responsive to their constituents and the needs of the many. Areas of focus include progressive messaging and communications, coalition building and resource sharing, and focused progressive policy goals. You can check out their Twitch live streams, and they go live on Facebook on at noon, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Please support this organization. It's a really great organization. It's just getting started here in Oklahoma. Thank you. Now enjoy the rest of the video. Well, hello. This is the Green Corn Rebellion Show. Today I am here with State Representative Collin Walke, who represents the 87th District here in the Oklahoma State House of Representatives. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Gregory. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, first question I have here is where are you from and where'd you grow up at?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Del City, Oklahoma. And after graduating from high school, I went to Oklahoma State for undergrad and then Oklahoma State University for law school.
That's cool. And what did you do before you became a state representative?
Yeah, so I've been an attorney since graduating from law school. I've always done predominantly business litigation, business transactions. I used to do a lot of family law, but not anymore. And so now I've transitioned into corporate counsel for a bunch of healthcare companies. And then I do a lot of mediations, trying to resolve conflicts. And I'd like to try and bring that practice to the Capitol. And back when we were having the budget battles in 2016 and 2017, I actually said, let me just sit down. Let me be the mediator and get this stuff resolved for you guys. So at any rate, so I do predominantly mediation and business transaction type stuff.
That's cool. So what made you want to run for the seat?
So I can't remember when we met, Gregory. It might have been 2016, but I
It was
ran one.
2017. It was
Was
the
it?
year after. Yeah.
So I ran in 2014 unsuccessfully against State Representative Jason Nelson at the time, and I decided to run against him. I had always kind of had it in my blood, so to speak. My dad ran for office in the state in Del City, and lost by about 15 votes.
Oh,
So
wow.
I decided to run, or I thought about running, and some people said, "Look, you can't beat Jason Nelson. It's this was 2010, 2012. Obama was president. Just look at Oklahoma politics." And in 2014, the Oklahoma Education Association had identified Jason Nelson as the number one enemy of public education, and I said, you know what, that's a good enough reason for me to at least try. And we came close. We were short by about 500 votes. And then in 2016, when he had vacated the seat, I decided that I wasn't going to let a year and a half, 2 years worth of effort just go to waste, and put my hat back in the ring. And fortunately, was successful. Again, my campaign then, and quite frankly, I think into the foreseeable future, will focus on increasing funding for public education. And of course, this year, Medicaid expansion and ensuring that that's protected going into the future. That's another big issue.
It's cool. Yeah, I remember, I think I had somewhat followed your campaign in 2016, but I didn't really know who you were at the time. And then we had met in 2017 sometime. I think that's when it was when we met. So
I
yeah.
lost friends, so I'll put it back to 14.
Um, so could you tell me about some of the accomplishments that you've been proud of up at the Capitol over the last couple of years?
Yeah. So first of all, I think anytime a Democrat can get a bill signed into law, that's an accomplishment. And I've had 5 bills signed into law in the last 2 years. I would say my proudest bill is actually instantiating Native American Day in October. Um, and so that's probably the one that I am most proud of because I think it's important. I think it was a statement about the importance of Native Americans and Indigenous peoples here in the state, giving them the respect that they deserve. especially given Governor Stitt's apparent lack of respect. So that's probably my proudest accomplishment. That being said, I was extremely proud to be part of the fight that ended up getting HB 1010XX passed, which was the big budget bill that raised gross production tax to 5%. That was just such a tough battle that I was glad to be part of the team that helped make that happen.
That's cool. And what were some of the other bills that you got passed?
Yeah, so one of the bills that I had passed was a bill that would actually improve safety for children that are within the foster care system. So one of the things that had been happening was you would have a teenage child, say for example, who kept running away from a foster home or would have some sort of repetitive problems, and DHS was going in and saying, listen to the parents who this child had been removed from the care of, and said, hey, listen, go and apply for guardianship through the district courts, because juvenile matters are held in a separate court system, et cetera. And so they were basically backdooring in a reunification process with these parents who had had their parental rights terminated in the first place. And I went, well, that doesn't make any sense. Now, there are some practical realities as to why they were doing that. I don't fault them for it. But the problem is that the juvenile court system, while overburdened, has certain resources that the regular district court guardianship proceedings do not. And so there's no way to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of those children. And so that bill actually prevented them from applying for guardianship through the district court. It still allowed them to apply for guardianship and seek reunification through the juvenile justice system. So that was another bill that I felt was really important and that I got done. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head what the other ones were, and I can't recall right now off the top of my head. I apologize. Yeah.
It's okay. Let's see. What are some other things that you'd like to see get passed or be addressed at the Capitol?
Yeah. So I've got two bills that I'm looking at running this year that are pretty big issues. I've run them both previously, but they both needed a lot of work, and we're getting through that process. So I'll tell you about the first one because we've put in for an interim study to study the issue of social media and privacy rights on the internet in general. And hopefully that will happen. I ran a bill last year because, I don't think most people recognize and appreciate how unprivate their lives actually are, and especially when anytime they open up the web browsers. And I can just tell you scary story after scary story if you want to know about the ways they track you online and things like that. So I don't think people appreciate that. And so I want to bring an awareness to that. And I want to pass a law that says, listen, you have to have affirmative approval from the individuals whose data you are using in order to use it into the future, sell it, whatever it may be. And there's a great 700-page tome on this called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, who was a former professor at Harvard. So I highly recommend that book. A shorter version of that book is called Zucked by a guy named Roger McNamee. I think that's a great intro into all of the privacy issues that we're facing. The second bill is the same bill that I ran last year. Last year's bill is what I'll call the shell bill for all intents and purposes. And it was a bill that would allow, that expands the mental health court regulations in this state. Right now we have mental health courts in, I forget exactly, but less than half of the state by far. And so if we're going to expand mental health courts to the entire state, we need a unified system of rules. And right now there is a statute in place, but it's only about 4 paragraphs long. And so what works in Oklahoma County won't work for what happens down in Salisaw, for example. But we need to have similar rules all the way around if we ever hope to actually improve mental health courts in the state and they actually expand them out. Of course, a component of that is mental health funding in and of itself. And I take the position that, yeah, it may cost us money on the front end, but it takes $5,000 to treat somebody in mental health court, it takes $20,000 a year to incarcerate them. That's a $15,000 savings right there. So add that up over time, and I think it would actually pay for itself. So those are two big bills this year that I'm interested in actually getting passed into law, and again with the interim study on privacy rights.
All right, that's cool. I hope those get passed in the next session. Yeah. How did you feel about the passing of 802?
Oh, I was extremely ecstatic about it. I mean, I was happy. I mean, quite frankly, it's sad that it had to get to the point where it had to be put to a state question, because I think that everybody realized we were cutting off our nose to spite our face by virtue of not expanding Medicaid in this state. And so to see it pass was a really good thing. I will say there are practical concerns about the viability of paying for it, those sorts of things, which we have to do because it's instantiated in our Constitution now. And next year we're already facing, a billion plus budget deficit, depending on how much CARES funding we can use. So there's a practical problem on that end, but I defy anyone. If I told you, listen, I'll give you $1, and you can make 9 off of it, who doesn't take that deal? We do it all day long. And what I think most people don't really appreciate is we're already paying for that healthcare anyway, right?
Yeah.
So why not allow the federal government to help subsidize that? Because right now it's on the backs of taxpayers in Oklahoma. It's on the backs of the hospitals, which is why you've seen so many rural hospitals close or shutter over the past few years. So the expenses are there. So it makes no sense to say, well, you know what, the expenses are there, but we're not going to take the federal dollars that would help offset some of those costs, help keep rural healthcare alive. So I was extremely ecstatic to see it passed, and I was very happy about it.
All right. I was too, because it's kind of been, what is it, like 10 years ago we should have done it, or were able to do it, and just now finally doing it. And the only disappointing thing about it was how narrowly it passed. It was
Yeah.
only,
You
yeah.
started first of the night, and it was like, oh, this thing's going to sail by. And then it really sweeped by. And that surprised me. I mean, it really did, because everything I had been hearing to that point, it was easily going to be a 55 plus vote.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about the response to the coronavirus that the governors had and the mayor of Oklahoma City?
So I'm glad I'm on your show, and I don't know how long you're going to let me talk.
Go on. You got time. Go on. Go ahead. You got time.
A similar question was asked when I was on Scott Mitchell's show a few weeks on News Channel 9. And, basically, what did you think of the governor's leadership? And my response was, well, what leadership? I think there's a false question. For an individual who mirrors Trump in every which way, including not using a mask, those sorts of things, playing it down, and quite frankly, being completely unsubstantive about it, right? So if you listen to any of his press conferences, you could basically create a drinking game around how many times he uses the word personal responsibility or innovative. And I'm like, oh, that's fine, but let's talk about the reality on the ground. And the sad part is that had we done an actual reopening that was graduated and gradual over time, as opposed to just ad hoc ripping the Band-Aid off, and they said we've met metrics or whatnot, but the reality is we didn't, and we haven't, and we're seeing another downturn as a result of that. We're seeing concerns about going back to school. We're seeing all of those things because we didn't do it right the first time. And now it's going to be worse by virtue of that. Plus, we're getting ready to come into the fall, whenever you're going to see an uptick in influenza cases, again, shrinking hospital capacity due to COVID. It's not a good situation. And we didn't have any leadership at the federal level, and we don't have any leadership at the state level. And so I think that Mayor Holt did a great job the first time around. I think he addressed that responsibly, did it the right way. And I appreciate the fact that his hands were tied to some degree as far as closing businesses down, things like that, because he's right. If Oklahoma City is closed, but Moore and Lewis City and Norman and everybody else is open, it doesn't fix the problem, right?
Yeah.
And so, especially since we're in an urban area. So I appreciate that. Going forward, though, past that initial shutdown phase to where we are now, I do wish he would have been stronger on a mask mandate sooner, those sorts of things. It's hard when you're in a leadership position to make those types of decisions because they're not, you are balancing lives against economic value. And it ought not to be that way. I don't disagree with that at all. It ought not to be that way. But when you have constituents calling you up, as I did, saying, hey, I want to go back to work. I want to do this. I need to be able to provide for my family. I'm going behind on my rent. How do you balance that out? I was glad to see them finally step up and put it to a vote in front of the city council. Again, I think that Mayor Holt could have done that himself, but I was glad to see that passed. I'm just concerned about what's going to happen in the next 30 to 60 days. I truly anticipate that we're going to need strong leadership, clearly at the local level, because Stitt's not going to do it, to corral these issues. You saw OKCPS saying that they were going to delay school for a little bit, see how things went. I think they pitched a reopening in September, early September at that stage. So we're going to have to step up, because otherwise this virus isn't going away. We're going to risk more lives unnecessarily. It doesn't have to be this way. And so I give Stitt a solid D- on, if not an F, on leadership at this stage.
Yeah, like, and I remember when he tested positive for coronavirus last week and said he was shocked that he got it. I was like, I don't think any of us are, but okay. But no, I mean, it's just been quite terrible how the response that the Republicans have had in general. I mean, it's not across the board. Like in some states, it's been a little bit better, but here it's just been absolutely scary. Like, the whole conversation about whether or not schools should be opening or not in a couple of weeks, because schools will be opening in a few weeks. Like, if we had kept all the businesses in the state shut down for a couple of more months during the summer, maybe we could be having a serious conversation about opening up the schools. But right now, it's kind of just like, I don't know. I think we shouldn't do that. It's just going to be like really, really bad. Like bad. Like, I mean, sure, you can try to do social distancing a little bit, but it's still not gonna, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just think
Yeah.
about when, and I truly don't think, I'm going to give Stitt the benefit of the doubt. I really don't think he was trying to denigrate the situation. But, when we had the first child death here in the state of Oklahoma, he said, we've just had one death. Well, yeah, but if that's your child, that's not the way you phrase it, and that's not the way you see it. And when you're forcing parents to sign waivers to send their children to school, that is not reassuring. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's just, that's just sad that would have to be a decision. My child's life or their constitutionally entitled education. And that's not a choice any parent should have to make. How do
Yeah.
you?
I mean, it's awful. I mean, on the other hand, the schools themselves don't necessarily have the resources to do online schooling. So that's like the other part about it. And people don't have internet at home because we don't have broadband that's universal or anything like that. And it's kind of a mess. It's showing a lot of holes that our education system, that our state entirely has. And it's it's kind of mind blowing. I didn't expect to be able to see this kind of crisis happen within. Well, maybe I expected it to happen, but not so early in my life, where this kind of a thing has taken over and has shed light on all these different things.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also been eye-opening to see all of the holes in our system, both as a state and a nation, that this has brought to light. The low wage, the depression of wages, the lack of savings that most people have. Again, not because everybody's just out there wasting dollars. It's because we don't have the same income today that we had 30 years ago, and most people have more debt today by virtue of student loans or whatever it may be. And that is a huge problem. And it's a real big problem when you look at it in connection with the stock market, because historically you used to think, well, the stock market's tied to economic health. Well, it's pretty clear now that the stock market is tied to venture capital being infused into it, as opposed to any real indication of a company's health.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of problems that this is pointing out, but I would hope, and it's probably going to have to be after this election, assuming that Biden gets elected, I would hope that this is now an opportunity to rethink how we do things. You see, for example, I think it was Yale and maybe Harvard as well, that decided to do completely online schooling, right? Well, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, right now I'm doing Yale's course on happiness. It's free. Anybody can go do it, right? I think that opening up these systems of learning and figuring out, oh, well, wait a minute, we don't have to have a $50 billion endowment like what Harvard has to give a good education to these students, will help us rethink the new generation in ways that we can make money.
Yeah, and another thing is with the universities and the colleges, I'm actually kind of disappointed with some of the things that they're doing. They closed down back in March and April and May, and they did everything online. And it's a little bit easier for the colleges to be able to say, "Hey, everything's going to be online," because that's how a lot of things are done anyway outside of the classroom. But now a lot of colleges are opening back up and aren't really like, I know UCO, not trying to badmouth UCO because I go there, but they're doing kind of like a hybrid thing where they're allowing students to take online or take in school classes, but like virtually or whatever. But also they're like making us pay more in tuition, and because of that, and I'm like, I don't think that's right. Like, the colleges just saved money because they didn't reimburse us on tuition last semester, and we didn't even use the school building. So it's really kind of, like, as a college student, I'm looking at that, I'm like, huh? Like, it's I feel like I'm being ripped off some. So yeah. So the last question I have here is, what kind of music do you listen to?
So if you would have asked me this question a year ago, I'd have a wildly different answer. So I'll tell you now, I generally don't listen to music anymore. I generally don't listen to radio anymore. And the reason is because I'm a very heavy meditation and mindfulness practitioner. And so I typically prefer the silence. But when I do listen to, so when I work out, I do listen to rap, Notorious B.I.G., Bone Thugs and Harmony, people that I grew up listening to, and even some modern stuff too. So that I have a lot of alternative rock, like Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, those sorts of things. Classical and jazz. My brother's a jazz musician. I went to the Manhattan College of Music for his master's degree, and so I grew up listening to jazz and classical. So when I'm working, those are the types of things I do. But if I'm just driving down the road, I typically listen to podcasts or something like that. But that's kind of my range. Although I will tell you, because I know that you're a fan of them, I'm a big fan of Rage Against the Machine. So we've got that in common. Yeah.
That's cool. What podcasts do you listen to?
So they vary, but my phone is in front of me. I was about to say, let me look at my phone and I can tell you what they are. So I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast. Not all of them, because there are some people I just don't want to listen to.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm good on that. But like he had Oliver Stone on this past week, and that was fascinating because I didn't know, for example, that Oliver Stone served in Vietnam. Right. So Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, the 10% Happier podcast, which is kind of a meditation podcast. Sam Harris's podcast, and then I listened to just a few others at random. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I listen to Joe Rogan's podcast occasionally when he has someone on I want to hear from. Like when he had Jon Stewart on a couple of weeks ago, I listened to that. Yeah.
I thought that was an interview with John.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I assume you probably listened to him when Bernie was on there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Listen to when someone who's on one of my other favorite podcasts is on, like he had David Pakman on about a year or two ago. I listened to him, and when he had Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk on, I listened to that. But generally, I don't really listen to Joe Rogan that much. But he's an interesting interviewer. So yeah. Most of the podcasts I listen to have to do with like news and politics. So I listen to the Majority Report. I listen to the Michael Brooks Show. Rest in peace, Michael Brooks. I listen to Chapo Trap House. Stuff like that. Huh?
Is that all about EDM?
No, Chapo Trap House it's a politics podcast. It's just the name is music.
Right. All right.
But yeah, But yeah, stuff like that. I also listen to a couple of new metal podcasts like the POD Cast and Roach Coach. So I'm kind of not really all over the place, but it's several different podcasts that I listen to. I probably listen to too many podcasts, but yeah.
Well, and really, I mean, I spend the majority of my time reading, just because that I enjoy to read, and it's amazing. I like reading because you can feel like you're having a conversation with the author and learn new things. I just finished a book, the John Bolton's new book, which I was dying to read for a whole slew of reasons, right? But when you have somebody on the right who's attacking Donald Trump, I'm like, I want to hear what this guy has to say. And it was a fascinating read, and of course, I agree with nothing that John Bolton has to say except all the bad stuff that he was saying about Trump. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, thank you for coming on. This has been a really interesting conversation. I've been wanting to have you on for a while now. Where can we find you on social media and whatnot?
Yeah. So on Twitter, Walke for 87. On Facebook, Collin Walke. On my official page, are the best way to reach me. And then obviously, if you want to go to the okhouse.gov website, I'm on there if you need to call me or send me an email or anything along those lines. I try and respond to every single email that I get from a constituent within 24 hours. Most of all my constituents have my cell phone. So I always appreciate hearing. In fact, as a matter of fact, I was speaking with a constituent yesterday, and she said, well, I moved here 2 or 3 years ago. I want to help you out in your campaign, those sorts of things. I said, well, I appreciate that. I said, why? You seem really eager. Why haven't you been in touch before? And she goes, well, because I know that we agree on everything. And so what I people is, even if you think I agree with you, please email me, because sometimes we come up on dicey votes that people know how I'm going to vote for it, right? But if I can say, look, I had 50 constituents call me and say vote no, and I only had one that called and said yes, it just makes it that much better for me to go, that's what they want me to do. And because that's what I'm elected for. Man, I do truly believe that, save and except for certain principled issues, right, that kind of violate what I think is morality, so to speak, I guess. I think that representatives have an obligation to vote in line with their district. And so that's why I want to hear from my constituents, because there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, right? I mean, we've got to vote on everything from tag agencies to gasoline taxes to agriculture stuff. You can't be an expert in all of that. And so when constituents call you and can explain these things to you is very beneficial. So listen, if you're my constituent, whoever's constituent you are, I really hope that you reach out to your representative every chance that you get regarding a bill that is of importance to you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Gregory. If you need anything else, let me know, and I'm more than happy to come back anytime.
All right. Cool.